Hi, and welcome to today's edition of Mid-South Viewpoint. Hi, I'm Byron Tyler. Today we're joined by Colby Barrett. He is a Marine Corps veteran, a farmer, and an entrepreneur. His latest mission has taken him far beyond our American soil. He's the producer of a gripping new documentary entitled A Faith Under Siege, which brings you, the viewer, to the front lines of Vladimir Putin's war on Christianity in occupied Ukraine. Recently returning from the region, Colby offers a first-hand account of the persecution facing Ukrainian Christians, the grassroots supporting coming from Americans, and really the spiritual battle being waged alongside the physical one. And we want to talk about that. Colby, welcome to Bot Radio Network here in Memphis today.
Byron, thanks so much for having me on and for bringing attention and prayer to this really important issue.
My good friend Joe Battaglia, I don't know if you know Joe or not, but Joe reached out to me and said, you've got to meet Colby. He sent me Faith Under Siege. Is it long? It's longer than 10 minutes.
Right. The film's about 60 minutes. And
okay.
If you go to faithundersiege.com, it's up there for free for anybody to see.
I got to watch I think about a 10-minute segment,
right.
Kind of like a little teaser clip for that. And oh boy, Colby, my heart was just ripped out thinking about what's going on and really how we're so unaware. The news is not reporting the things that we're going to talk about today. And so, first of all, can you start by telling us a bit about your background, being a Marine, a farmer, entrepreneur, and how did that lead you to go to Ukraine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I served in the Marine Corps. I was a ground intelligence officer for 4.5 years. After that, ran a larger construction company and recently have taken over the second largest organic peach orchard in Colorado. So that's kind of my day job now. You'll notice I didn't say filmmaking. I was invited to join an aid convoy to Ukraine last summer, and my first answer was no. Right, I've got 4 kids. There's a war there. It was right in the middle of our harvest. I had a lot of great reasons to not go, but I felt that Holy Spirit pull on my heart to not only go, but also to kind of look at what stories are happening over there. And when I saw the little reporting there is on what's happening to Christians at the hands of the Russians in occupied Ukraine, is just heartbreaking. And it blew my mind. You know, I feel like I'm one of these people that follows the news and I try to stay updated. I wasn't hearing about this. And that was kind of my sign. The Holy Spirit was saying, hey, go over there, help, but also like you need to bring this story back to people just like you that have never heard about this because it's just not getting out.
What was it, Colby, the particular moment or story that compelled you so much while you were there?
You know, there's so many. One that really stood out was a pastor, and he's in Kherson, which is right across the river from the Russians. This area was occupied by Russian forces, and then the Ukrainian army pushed them out, but they're still just across the river. When we met this pastor, he had been hit 5 times by Russian missiles and drones. Once on Christmas Eve. The most recent attack was the Russian drone had actually dropped a grenade on his family's minivan as they were coming back from a church camp. Then they hit his house to try to finish off the job. But this guy's, his faith and his resilience it just uplifted me. I thought I was going to go over there and help them out. Right? And we did. We delivered aid and medical supplies and these kind of things. We told them that we were praying for them, but the impact on my own faith to see somebody that had been, you know, really having to truly rely on God was so impactful. And unfortunately, he's still in Kherson. It's getting worse. He was just hit. His daughters were just hit 2 weeks ago. Thankfully, they're okay, but they did destroy their vehicle. But he remains. He remains in resilience and defiance. And when you talk to him, he laughs. You know, although there's a gravity of the situation, he knows that the Lord is watching out for him. And so he has that calm that comes with a real close relationship with God.
Yes. Well, as a military veteran, a Marine veteran, how did your experience help shape what you approached in this project in your time in Ukraine?
This is one of the things that really became apparent because, to make a documentary, I've got no skills or abilities on that. But if you look at my background, the things that the Lord's led me to do in the past, it's all about putting together teams and leading those teams. So in the Marine Corps, I led a scout sniper platoon, right? So getting the right pieces together to go do a sniper mission. In the private sector, I ran a fairly large construction company, and that was building teams to go accomplish difficult missions of different sorts. And this was really no different. We found a really good Ukrainian film crew, one of the best in the nation, to shoot these stories because they could shoot them in a way that brought a real familiarity to the subject. And then we found a really good post-production crew in New York. And then the last piece of that puzzle was we're asking Christians that have sometimes lost family members, been attacked themselves, sometimes have been tortured at the hands of the Russians, to come and tell us about the worst day they've ever had. And that requires some real trust, and we didn't, that's not something you build overnight, but we were able to team up with a nonprofit called the Ukraine Freedom Project. Stephen Moore runs that, and they'd been talking to a few of these believers, and so that opened that door. And so like I said, I don't have any skills or abilities to build a documentary, but I know how to build a team, and we were able to build a really great team to tell this story in a way that lets an American audience almost like you're there to be there and hear these stories.
And I think that's what's so important when you create a documentary like this, Colby, as you well know. Well, in the process of meeting so many people and hearing so many tragic stories, was there something in this film that particularly moved you or shocked you during the process of producing this film?
I think that the thing that shocked me the most is, coming from America, it's really safe here. It's really easy here. We become very dependent on ourselves rather than God because, it's just so easy here, and we are divided. We kind of fight amongst ourselves, partly because it's just so easy. You go to Ukraine, especially being in the believer community there, there is no division. It's absolute unity to create good and to fight evil, which is sometimes just across the river. That was something that until you can kind of experience that, it's tough to get that across. So that complete reliance on God and that unity of the whole country, but really especially believers. In the U.S., there's religious diversity like there is in Ukraine. They've got Catholics, they've got Protestants, they've got Orthodox. It's a very diverse community. The way they came together, all Christians coming together to help each other and to help their community, was something that it just blew my mind to see that. I was so happy to be part of that same body of Christ.
Yes.
It made me very proud.
Yeah. Well, can you kind of describe the war zone, if we could say that?
Yes.
Were you actually, there was firing going on, rockets, while you were there? What was the biggest challenge being in a war zone filming this project?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you go to Ukraine, about 80% of that country is still controlled by Ukrainians. And I'd say about, 80% of that is pretty normal. If you go to Lviv or Kyiv, these big cities, they look like Chicago or Omaha. There's not a lot of destruction. There are air raids and they get hit, but the Ukrainian air defenses are very good. And so you go to those places and it seems like life is normal. As you get closer to the front in the areas that Russia had came into, destroyed, and then was pushed out of, those places are the kind of war zone that you would expect. And I'd say that's probably 10-20% of the country is in some level of destruction. The rest is really kind of nice. They have restaurants are open, the playgrounds have kids on them. It's very as normal as people can be in what they're going through.
That contrast has to be really be kind of weird, right?
It's really weird, and to go to the front. We weren't interviewing a lot of soldiers or anything like that. These were mostly civilians. And so we were probably 10 miles or so from the front lines, and you can hear artillery. One of the restaurants we were in, we actually we forgot to get our receipt, and we had to call them a couple days later, and they weren't answering. And the reason was they had been hit by a Russian, was actually an Iranian drone that the Russians had launched that blew all the windows out. So they're cleaning up from that. So we weren't able to get our receipt right away. But I can tell you, though, even being really close to the front where you can see artillery, you can hear the explosions, there are drones coming into the cities you're coming into, being with these people of faith, I was not afraid when I was there. And that's kind of a weird thing to say. It's not that I'm some super brave guy, but when you're with those people that have put their trust in God, they still take good precautions. They try to be safe, but they have kind of put their fate in the Lord's hands, and that just washed over me as well. And so I really felt protected. I felt calm, and I felt safe the entire time I was there, even when we were pretty close to the front lines.
So gaining access to the communities and individuals that you put in your documentary, was there any difficulty, or how did that work out for you?
This is one of the things that really stood out. In the movie industry, which I'm kind of learning, the joke is that filming just goes terribly. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. We had the opposite experience. We're trying to bring multiple vehicles into the front line and interview people in places where there are active Russian drone attacks. Everything went perfectly. To the second, everybody was where they needed to be. Everything worked out logistically in a way that is statistically improbable.
I was going to ask you, was there any miracles or divine interventions? It sounds like there was a variety of them.
The whole thing. And I'd love to say, hey, I'm just an amazing logistician and we had a great team. Love to take credit for that, but this was a God thing. There is no other answer. It's hard to shoot a film in peacetime. In Dallas, Texas, shooting a film is hard. Doing that on the front lines and having everything go perfectly, it's just not. There's no other explanation there. So it seemed like every day of filming was divinely ordained. That being said, I cried every night after filming because these stories were just so painful to hear, and to hear what these people were going through.
Oh my. So let's talk a little bit more about the role of faith and how it plays into the resilience of the Ukrainian Christians and what you saw and how they're living it out. Because here in America, as you well know, Colby, we don't have, anything really pressing. We're trying to get to lunch, on time, but the pastor's preaching too long on Sunday morning, right?
This is one of the big contrasts between wartime Christians and the Ukrainian people are very resilient. They love freedom. They are a very faithful society. I think around 85% of Ukrainians are Christians. But the wartime piece highlights those in a way it's kind of hard to describe. I think about churches in America. If their air conditioning system went out, we got to cancel church, or we'll go online or whatever. The Ukrainians, we met a group of believers that were in a town called Izium, which had been mostly destroyed by the Russians. They were in a Baptist church, and they were hiding in the basement. Their church was destroyed by a Russian missile, completely burned down on top of them. And they had no electricity, no water, no heat. And they had actually hooked up a car battery to a single light bulb. The church burning above them gave them the heat they needed, and they were holding services in this basement for almost 3 weeks.
Oh my.
They were down there hiding and holding services. So it's just a whole different level of faith. When it's not easy, they almost value it more when it's not easy and they have to fight for it. And that's exactly what they're doing, because in the Russian occupied areas, the preaching the gospel is actually illegal. Since 2016 in Russia, they passed a set of laws called the Eurovia laws, which made preaching the gospel in a public manner illegal. So if I was sitting next to you on a bus stop and I said, hey, let me tell you about Jesus, he changed my life, that's illegal in Russia. Those laws then come into the Russian occupied territories. So it is illegal to preach the gospel in those parts of Ukraine. And so I think the people that are in free Ukraine, they see what's happening to their countrymen behind this new Iron Curtain, and they value their religious freedom even more because they can exercise freely, even though there's a tax.
Wow. So pastors and church leaders, how are they seen to be guiding their members through this chaos of war?
It's fantastic to see the way pastors have stepped up. So one of the things that brought this home was stories about the early church. In Roman times, there would be plagues in the Roman cities, and all the people would flee to the countryside. The Christians stayed, and they provided aid, they helped the sick. This was something that really spread Christianity in the Roman Empire because people saw that Christians, they don't have a lot of fear. Mm-hmm. They want to help. There's a lot of love there, a lot of resilience, and a lot of defiance. That same thing is happening in Ukraine. So as the Russians get close, a lot of people very logically flee. Many of the pastors will stay to shepherd the members of their flock that stay. And when you see this, it really is something that brings hope, not just to the believers in those towns, but to the whole town itself. So that pastor I mentioned that had been hit 6 times now by Russian drones, his church went from around 50 people to now they're having services, sometimes 500, sometimes 700 people.
Wow.
They have to set up all these amazing, they put speakers out in the parking lot and those kind of things. And if you look at their service, about 20% of the people there would be secular folks, not Christians. They come to hear his message of hope, love, faith, resilience, and many, many people are coming to Christ as a result of the way Christians in Ukraine are holding themselves and demonstrating faith, our faith, and it's just so cool to see.
Wow. Let's remind our listeners right now, you're tuned to Mid-South Viewpoint here on Bot Radio Network. I'm Byron Tyler. On the show today, Colby Barrett, who is a Marine veteran and also producer of a film called A Faith Under Siege, which brings you, the viewers, right into the war there of what Christianity is facing in the occupied area of Ukraine. And so we want to continue our conversation. We appreciate Colby being able to take this time. Colby, what are some of the lesser-known facts about the persecution that's happening right now that Americans probably aren't even aware of?
I think some of the stats that really resonated with me was just the number of Christian faith leaders that have been murdered by the Russian invasion forces. So 49 priests and pastors have been killed. When we made the movie, it was 47. It's now.
Are they being targeted, you think?
Yeah. And this is worth kind of exploring a little bit. If Russian occupation forces come in and they find a Baptist pastor, they really go after those guys. In the least case, they would forcibly deport them, essentially kick them out. The most common would be torture and interrogation or imprisonment, and then in the most extreme cases, actually murdering them. And the reason is you kind of have to step back a little bit and understand how religion works in Russia. There's one favored church, which is the Russian Orthodox Church, and that's kind of, if you want to be aligned with the state, you need to be part of that church. It is heavily tied in with the state efforts. They have similar messaging. They're very much tied at the hip. And so when Russian forces come in and they find a Baptist, they say, well, that's an American religion. You must be a CIA member, right? They assume that a Baptist or Pentecost or whatever is somehow tied in with the American state. They don't like Americans. So that's one reason, is just a geopolitical attack on somebody that's deemed to be pro-American. The second piece is for authoritarian regimes that are trying to control a population, faith is super disruptive, right? If my only allegiance is to Jesus, I'm going to be really hard to control, and it's going to be hard to get me to go along with whatever the party line is. And that's really what would happen here is they would come in, tell the Baptist pastor, look, you need to support annexation or support this or support that. And they would say, no, I'm just trying to shepherd my flock. And that's where a lot of that stuff would come from. So it's an anti-American vibe, and then also a faith. How can we destroy faith? Because faith is very disruptive. It's similar to what the Soviets were doing because those same things. But this level of brutality is what I've been told from the people that have been through Soviet times. And this is that the level of brutality and dehumanization of people is worse now than even with what was happening in the Soviet times. So really hard stories to hear.
So what about disinformation? How does that affect both the Ukrainians and this international perceptions of the war that's going on there?
There's so much information and disinformation out there about what's happening in Ukraine, and that's really what we wanted to do with the documentary was you don't need to hear about what Colby thinks about the war. I'm just another American commenting on it. We wanted firsthand stories from people that had lived through it. Cut through all the, propaganda and misinformation and those things and just go right to Christians that had been through this and hear their stories directly. The amount of money spent on propaganda by the Russian state is somewhere between 1.6 and 2.4 billion dollars per year.
Did you say billion?
Billion, yeah.
Oh my.
It is one of the few places I think that Russia is really winning this war, is the ability to push their narrative out to audiences all over the world, especially Americans. Unfortunately, you see a lot of Americans kind of picking up these Kremlin talking points and rolling with them. And it's not that they're bad people. It's just they've got bad information that's coming. And so that was really what we were trying to do. We don't have a $2.4 billion budget. I funded this film because I believe in it and I felt called by the Holy Spirit. But we're trying to get that word out there because our thesis is American Christians are good people. When they get good information, they're going to make good decisions. And we also think that the truth, it still works, and it's so much more powerful than lies. And so, we're fighting against a $1 billion, $2 billion budget there, but when you have the truth on your side and you're telling stories of real people going through this, it can be very powerful.
So, Colby, the underground and persecuted churches, how are they managing to survive and even thrive right now?
Yeah, so you see in the territory of Ukraine that's still controlled by the Ukrainians, they have religious freedom the same. It'd be much like the U.S. So they're able to worship freely, and the war has pushed them into a place where they're providing a lot of aid to their community. So churches there are really growing in the Ukrainian occupied portions of Ukraine. If you go to the Russian or occupied portions, the occupation authorities are kind of trying to make it as hard as possible. So certain churches have been just outlawed completely. The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, not allowed, like completely banned. They've kicked all the priests out. If you're, let's say, a Baptist, they've put some stuff in to where they want to control the church. So let's say you and me are Baptists, we go there and we want to hold a church service. We first have to register the building that we're in. We then need to give them a list of all of our church members. Then we can't hold services unless we have 30 people with Russian passports there. And that kind of ensures that there's at least one spy in the group. More than likely, if we had a pastor there, if he hadn't been kicked out or killed, he would be having a lot of pressure put on him. So, we had one pastor that the Russian authorities planted drugs in his car so then they could pin these crimes on him so they can then control him to make sure he's preaching pro-Russian stuff in there. If you get caught doing some underground services, the penalty can be really bad. There was one lady we heard of named Lena who had a Bible study in her home with a few friends and was sentenced to 20 years for terroristic activity.
Oh my.
So The Russians are doing everything they can to prohibit worship, prohibit faith. The Christians are not having it. They are still they're still holding on to their faith, but it is really hard for them, and the consequences of getting caught are really severe.
Colby, something very disturbing to me that I watched in that little clip of your documentary was the children that are they being kidnapped or taken from their parents in these territories and given Russian passports? And tell me some of this. This is really shocking.
Yet another thing that shocked me getting over there and hearing these stories. The low end number is 19,546 children have been abducted into Russia. There's a series of 43 camps that Russia has set up inside of Russia, a few more in Belarus, to re-educate these kids. So basically to turn them into Russian kids. That's kind of the first step. The next step is militarization in a lot of cases. So some of these camps are actually military camps to kind of get them ready to fight first Ukraine, and then the next step is the war against the West is kind of the way that they're taught that. And we were able to talk to a number of these kids that had escaped, and the stories were just harrowing. One kid had been kept in solitary confinement with no food for a total of 15 days. Many of these kids are open to trafficking, sexual assault, other, just horrific stuff. But yeah, the low end number of abducted kids is around 20,000. I think it's probably a double or triple that, but that's just the ones they know about. And then what's happening to these kids is really bad. So that's the bright spot. There's around 1,300 that have been brought back, and we were able to talk to a few of them. But just heartbreaking. And I think that's one of the things this isn't a political movie. We're not trying to take any political stances here, but we do say, it is really important that in any kind of peace process, any kind of negotiations, let's just get these kids back. It doesn't cost Russia anything, some transportation costs. Let's get them back to their families. And let's push for that. I think as Christians, that would be something that we can all get behind, is getting kids back.
Most definitely. So how can ordinary Americans like me, Colby, help support these communities both spiritually and materially?
That's a great question. That's one of the things we're really trying to do with the film is not just getting people to see it, but really to take action. And on our website, which is faithundersiege.com, we have kind of a step-by-step approach on how to help. The first step is pray. We talked to a lady over there they're rebuilding some homes, and she said she can really feel when there's a lot of prayer coming from the international community, and similarly she can feel when that kind of drops off. So that prayer piece is so key. On our website there's some guides to what to pray for and some of the specific things, but that prayer piece is the number one most important thing. Then going down the list, advocating for this with, your church leaders, with elected representatives. Hey, let's not forget about these kids. Let's make sure that the 2.5 million Christians that are behind this new Iron Curtain are able to hopefully worship freely. And then we've got a number of nonprofits that people can donate to. There's ones that are focusing on getting these kids out. There's other ones that are supporting individual churches and the rebuilding of homes and community centers. So there's really a wealth of information there. But I would say if anybody feels moved here, watch the movie, but don't stop there. This is a time to take some action. And again, prayer is the number one thing we can do. But a lot of times that prayer leads to another pull to do something in a physical sense.
So what's next for you, Colby, and your film, A Faith Under Siege?
Right now, it's really about getting the word out to people. We really we want people to show this at their church. Like I said, this isn't something where we're trying to make money on. This is a nonprofit effort, but getting people to watch this with their community of believers is so powerful because it allows for some of those discussion and reflection and continued prayer. So if you get on our website, I feel like I just keep plugging the website here.
Please do, yeah.
There's a little form there on faithundersiege.com. You fill it out. We'll get you all the information you need to screen it at your church. And so that's a big one. We've had a huge response from the Christian media community to play this. So we've played it 6 times on CBN. TBN's just filmed a couple specials with us. We've been on Newsmax, Salem, Redeem TV.
By Radio Network now.
Yes, exactly. And that's such a cool thing to see that, you worry on these when you put this content out, anything that's, controversial or politically charged or has these things, how are people going to relate to that? But I think once they see this and say, look, this is about real Christians going through real tough times, and not only is this a way to learn what's really going on, but it's a way to kind of learn about what does our faith look like in wartime? Because we don't have that experience in the U.S. since maybe World War II, when we were really going through an existential kind of thing, and that's our grandparents' generation. And so to see what do freedom-loving people that love their faith, how do they respond? It's really something to see, even taking the geopolitical context aside. So
yes. Colby Barrett, thank you for sharing your faith, your heart, your passion, for telling the story of our brothers and sisters in Ukraine that are facing such dismal conditions right now because of the war, being persecuted for their faith in Jesus Christ. Our prayers for our brothers and sisters there in Ukraine and the continued work that you do. Again, friends, the film is called A Faith Under Siege, and you can go to the website. And if you just, am I right, Colby, if you want to individually watch it from at home with your family, you can do that online at no cost. Just go to the website. Again, that website is afaithundersiege.com.
It's just faithundersiege.com, and the movie's there. It's free. There's additional content in there as well if you want to dig a little deeper, but that's all there for free. And
there's also a place where you can make donations to help support the cause and the efforts that I know there are enormous costs, for you to make a film like this, I know. But God bless you, my brother. Thank you so much for sharing with us and keeping us informed about this desperate time right now that we're in our world, especially for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. Again, the film is called A Faith Under Siege. It's a must-watch for all of our Bot Radio Network listeners. I hope you'll do that. Colby, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on and for bringing prayer and light to this important issue.
Well, friends, that's all the time we have on this edition of Mid-South Viewpoint here on Bot Radio Network. I'm Byron Tyler. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.